Kia ora tātou, good evening ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this Southland Chamber of Commerce mayoral discussion this evening. Tonight you'll get to meet and hopefully learn a little bit about each of the candidates for the Invercargill City Mayoralty before you cast your vote in the election that's coming up in just over 5 weeks' time on the 12th of October. My name's John Prendergast, and it's my pleasure, and I expect at times my challenge, to chair this event tonight. You'll see that we have 4 candidates standing for the mayoralty, and they're all sitting, and I'm the chairman and I'm the only one without a chair. So I'm not sure how that works. This year, as I said, we have 4 brave people who have put themselves forward for your consideration as Mayor of Invercargill City. And in preparing for tonight, I thought I'd better find out what the term mayor actually means. And I was surprised. Firstly, in the Collins English Dictionary, the word mayor comes immediately after mayhem and mayonnaise. And the second thing I've discovered, the word mayor is of Latin and French origins, and it means, and I kid you not, it means bright one. So tonight your challenge by the time you leave here is to decide which of our 4 candidates is indeed the brightest one, and therefore the rightest one for you to vote for on the 12th of October. Let me introduce our 4 candidates, and I'll do so in alphabetical order. Would you please welcome firstly Becs Amundsen. Moving through the alphabet, Steve Chernishov.
Kia ora.
Next we have Darren Ludlow. And of course Sir Tim Shadbolt. And a little bit of housekeeping, cell phones, if you could turn your cell phones off or onto silent please, that would be appreciated. You're welcome to take photos of the candidates, but not welcome to Facebook Live tonight's event. We have Brian Campbell from Big Screen Advertising is filming the event for tonight, and that will go up on the link to that film will go up on the Chamber of Commerce's website later tonight or early tomorrow morning. So you can either stay up all night waiting for it or get up in the morning and do it. But it will be there by tomorrow morning, Brian has assured us. Let me tell you a little about how tonight's event is going to run. In a few minutes, we will hear opening addresses from each of our candidates, where they'll have 2 minutes each to tell us what they see or how they see the role of Invercargill Mayor. And we will be keeping strictly to that 2-minute limit, and we need to do that I haven't got the limit. But that's the noise that you will hear if one of our candidates inadvertently and accidentally, I'm sure, oversteps that time limit, any time limit. I am very conscious that Tim Shadbolt once spoke for 26 hours in this very theatre, and we don't want any repetition of that tonight. After the opening addresses, we'll move to a series of questions on topical issues, and each of the candidates have been given prior notice of the topics, so they know the broad themes, but they haven't been given the specific questions, so that will be a small surprise for them, and we'll see how they respond to that. But the 6 topics are current and future issues, council performance, the inner city redevelopment, housing, city assets, and the 4 well-beings. And as I said, within each of those topics, I'll pose 1 or more questions for some of those topics, and the candidates will have the opportunity to answer. Right, we all heard that, didn't we?
That's a compulsory gin.
We won't hear that again, will we? If time permits, we may have an opportunity for questions from the audience, but we'll see how time goes. I really would like to have that opportunity if we possibly can, and that's just another subtle warning not to overstep your time limits, candidates. Some of you might have seen the promotional flyer for this event that said that we were expecting to finish around 7 o'clock. I think that's probably a bit optimistic. I expect it's more likely to be closer to probably 7:30-ish. Cool date, something around there, maybe 7:30. But if any of you do need to leave at any stage, just feel free to do so. At the end of question time, we'll ask each candidate in no more than 2 minutes to name their top 3 priorities, should they find themselves as the occupant of the mayoral office on the 12th of October. Then we'll get them in one sentence to tell us their number 1 leadership quality. And to finish, they'll each be given 1 minute to convince you as to why you should vote for them as the bright one, as the Mayor of Invercargill. So that's the format. Let's get underway. And as I said earlier, we're going to start with an opening address of 2 minutes from each candidate. So to begin with, can I please invite Becs Amundsen to tell us in no more than 2 minutes, how do you see the role of Invercargill Mayor?
Thanks, John. So I think there are 2 important roles for the Mayor of Invercargill. The first is as the leader of the team, the governance team, and the second is providing leadership for the city. Each role has different requirements. For the first, leadership of the governance team, I think there are a number of key things that need to be done. First is to ensure that councillors and the Mayor have the right training for their position so they can understand and execute their role properly. There needs to be work done also to build strategic vision of the team so the council has a clear direction. Each person in the team needs to feel like they have something to contribute and to be able to use their strengths and passions to make the council at a governance level operate well. It is the Mayor's role to keep a careful eye on this, ensure that issues are addressed and the council functions well. Most importantly, the Mayor needs to lead by example. With regard to the second part of this role, providing leadership for the city, I think it's important, with all the big projects coming up, that the Mayor is across all of these projects. They need to provide regular communication to the public about what's going on. They need to identify issues as they arise and address them. I think one area where we need to focus is on helping the public to understand the role of council and the way council operates. I believe we need, and I would as Mayor, work on a comprehensive project to provide opportunities for the public to grow their understanding of these things. It's about building civic understanding and having great communication. We need a Mayor with a strong relationship with a wide range of groups and sectors in the community, and we need a Mayor who sees their role as serving the community.
Thank you, Becs. We move now to Steve Chernishov. Steve, same question and the same 2 minutes. How do you see the role of Invercargill Mayor?
Fantastic. Good evening all. I would choose to address this issue by quoting directly from the Local Government Act 2002. The role of a Mayor is to provide the leadership to other members of the territorial authority and the people in the district of the authority. It is the role of a Mayor to lead the development of the territorial authority's plans, policies and budgets for consideration by members. A local authority must offer the distribution of benefits between the community as a whole, any identifiable part of the community and the individuals. The governing body of a council is responsible and democratically accountable for decision-making around acts such as the Resource Management Act 1991, the Health Act 1956, the Building Act 2004, and the Civil Defence Emergency Act 2002. Decision-making around transport and networks and infrastructure. Activities allocated to the governing body. Decision-making around the establishment and maintenance of service and facilities. Decision-making of the council-controlled organisation. Decision-making around compliance and financial management. Reaching agreements with local boards in respect to activities. There is a sub-part also, which I feel stronger to mention as this goes with my strongest part in the campaign we'll build on. What we're doing is we're building non-regulatory activities of the unitary authority in respect with a local board for decision making, including providing services, providing and operating facilities, and providing funding and other support to groups and organisations. The distinction between the two kinds of council offerings are, firstly, the local government must offer regulatory decision making. They must obey the laws, which we do very well. The council's non-regulatory decisions are more to do with what's best for the people beyond the laws. A non-regulatory decision is simply one that does not relate to a regulatory responsibility, duty or power, but this side of our council is the function in a matter that promotes the current and future interests of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next up we have Darren Ludlow. Darren, in 2 minutes, how do you see the role of Invercargill Mayor?
Thanks, John. The Mayor is a representative of the city and of the council. Their personal position comes after that and should be clearly articulated, or at least have been part of the mandate that they've sought through this electoral process. I believe the Mayor sets the tone for how council behaves, and I'm being quite clear in that I think community expectations are that we could do much better. So I'm looking for a mandate that makes that community expectation clear. There are times when we could do better with how we behave, both in meetings and outside of them. We need to be more respectful and more tolerant of each other. We don't want a council where everybody blindly agrees, but we do need to actively listen, genuinely keep an open mind, and then accept that people will have a different viewpoint. In the end, we come to a democratic decision, and we all have to get behind that, regardless of what position we took during the debate. It's council's decision, and we, as councillors and as a mayor, need to represent that. Otherwise, you can't genuinely say that you believe in democracy. I believe that a mayor needs to chair meetings in a way where all perspectives are heard, where everybody is clear of the process and where we are in that process and what it is that we are doing. There are times during this term when councillors haven't been that clear. The Mayor represents council's view to our neighbouring authorities at a provincial level and also to local government New Zealand, and is also expected to report back to council on how those meetings go, what those authorities are thinking or feeling, and what they hope to see us doing. That isn't always happening, and it's something that I want to change.
Thanks, Darren. Now to round out our opening addresses, our fourth candidate, Sir Tim Shadbolt. Tim, you've been looking at this role for some time now. How do you see the role of Invercargill Mayor?
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see your happy, smiling faces because you are participating in democracy, and that's what life is all about. And I believe the single most important issue in these elections will be determining the fate of 82 disabled workers. And I believe one of the most important duties of a mayor is to fight for his or her community, to ensure this city has a voice on the national stage. A mayor must fight on behalf of the thousands of citizens who signed a petition, and on behalf of the hundreds of citizens who made submissions on this issue. And there are many more battles that must be fought and won. The future management of the SIT and the fair allocation of transmission costs for the TY smelter. The present situation is outrageous. Of course, money is important, and this council ploughs its way through $100 million every year. But there are occasions in our history and in our life where money does not trample over humanitarian issues. And I believe this is one that we as a community should make a stand to show the rest of New Zealand how we feel about this issue and other issues that are confronting us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to all four candidates for your opening remarks. We'll come back to more pre-prepared statements from our candidates towards the end of tonight's event. And for each of those, we'll have a different order of speaking so that each candidate gets the opportunity to speak first, second, third, fourth. Happily, there are four different groups So that works out quite tidily, really. What we're going to do now, though, is move to questions for the candidates to answer if they choose to. So it's not compulsory for every candidate to answer every question, certainly recommended. They will have no more than 1 minute to do so. Question time will be a bit more free-ranging than the opening remarks in that there isn't a set order of speaking. So I will ask the questions and then I will invite the candidates to answer. And my first challenge in thinking about trying to manage 4 revved up candidates who want to make their impression as the bright one on all of you tonight, how am I going to manage that? And so I decided to go to Council's own standing orders and see just what the rules are. 65 pages of them, which I've condensed, you'll be pleased to know, to the appropriate bits. And it comes down to just 5 rules for tonight's question time. Firstly, the chairperson, that would be me, will rule on all procedural matters and any points of order. I like these standing orders already. Secondly, the chairperson, that would be me, will determine the order of speaking. And where 2 or more candidates want to speak, the chairperson will name the candidate who may speak first, and second, and third, and fourth. Thirdly, the chairperson's ruling on any matter is final and not open to challenge.
Yeah, right.
Fourth, I'm pleased you made that comment, Tim, because that segues nicely to the 4th rule. Any refusal to obey a chairperson's ruling or direction constitutes contempt. And the 5th rule, the chairperson may ask a member of the police to remove or exclude a member from the meeting. I'm not aware that we have any serving police officers here tonight, but I did see His Worship Mayor Gary Tong somewhere in the audience, and I know Gary's a past police officer, so Gary, I'll give you the nod if I need your services. But I'm hopeful that we won't. So with those rules of engagement and that 1 minute time frame clearly fixed in your minds, let's begin. And the first topic tonight is current and future issues for Invercargill. And the question is, what would you say are the top 3 issues on residents' and ratepayers' minds as they look to the future of our city? Who would like to have a crack at that? Becs, and then Tim.
I'll give it a crack. So I've been hanging out at a few supermarkets and shopping centres, talking to people, and the topics that seem to be coming up most with the people I've been talking to have been the museum. Also around rates increases and whether it's possible to make them less. And those are probably the 2 most common things that get talked about.
Thank you, Becs. Tim.
Yes, well, of course, I've been very excited over the last week because big jets have been landing, and boy, does that create a bow wave. Mind you, it's pity about the measles. So the key issues I see, beside connectivity like that, and you don't know what it's going to lead to. A lot of people have said, the jets are all very well, Mayor Tim, but it'll be good for tourism and good for business, but that's about all. And I refer them to Splash Palace and say, well, look, here's an example. We looked at what was needed in this community. It doesn't have every high school with its own swimming pool. Let's build one really good one that the high school students can use and share. And what happened? The swimming pool ended up chocker full of old people doing aqua jogging and that. There was hardly any room for this. Because you just can't predict what the future's going to hold in so many ways. And then, of course, SIT, where we did so well with 0 fees. And we had to sausage sizzle outside the warehouse and raffle off half-frozen chooks and that, but we managed to raise $7 million for that scheme. And it meant, it meant lots of things.
Thank you, Tim. I'm sure we'll hear more from you about that. Steve or Darren? Steve?
Rightio. Well, coming back to the job of the council, a lot of people seem to be talking with me about things like the Health Act and the Building Act and the Civil Defence Emergency Act and the Resource Management Act, and asking, Steve, if you come into Mayor, what are we going to do about how it's actually too hard to start a new business? What are we going to do about how it's really hard to get a liquor licence if I want to set up a restaurant or a cafe or a bar? What are we going to do about how I actually feel like it's getting way too expensive to build things? And there are heaps of barriers in place, and the whole process of trying to get anything that's a development done feels like a punishment, you know? Like I'm concerned that I don't know enough and that it's just going to cost too much, it's out of my depth. And so that's really the big issue that seems to be coming across my discussion panel a lot. People saying, can you streamline processes? Can you make things easier to understand? Can you figure out a way to get our city centre actually functioning? If we're going to build all this new stuff, what are we going to put in there? Where are all the people going to come from who are willing to give this a crack? And so we're going to work on addressing that. And I do believe that the procedure does have to come back to my point from just before about taking the non-regulatory approach and looking at how we can resource the public to understand exactly what needs to be done, and then finding a way to make it so that the council is a helping hand to be able to get you through those processes, and we end up with businesses in our city, we end up with awesome building happening, and we end up being able to live within our means. Let's do that.
Steve, Darren, there's 1 minute available. Do you want that?
I absolutely do. The three things that people have been talking about lately, obviously waste is the first thing, and it's difficult to talk about it because it's obviously still a work in progress, but no matter which side of the fence people sat on, I can assure you that everybody sitting at the council table has the interests of the disabled workers at SDE at heart. The other thing is the museum, which obviously I've been involved with since 2004. You can't imagine how heartbreaking it was for us to have to close it, and no matter what rhetoric and misinformation there is out there, the current process was inevitable, and everybody wants to see it back up and running. The really good thing that's come out of it is the community outpouring has reaffirmed for us how valuable an asset people see the Southland Museum and Art Gallery is. The third one is SIT, which unfortunately has cropped up on our radar over the last couple of months. You know, it's a major financial and cultural contributor to Invercargill and the wider Southland province. The problem is there's going to be change, and that seems inevitable now, but we still have a lack of information over the detail of that change. And as much as the city can, we want to get in behind anybody who's looking to make sure that we've got a great institution that people want to come and study at, and that the staff want to stay and work at.
Thanks, Darren. That 15-year involvement with Southland Museum almost qualifies you as an exhibit, I'd imagine. It's a very long stint.
Some days more than most.
Yeah. We move to topic 2, which is council performance. The first question, if elected mayor, how will you lead a council to ensure the city gets the best from the assembled councillors, given that potentially there may be a very diverse range of age, gender, ethnicity, skill and experience around the new council table? Darren.
I touched on this before because I see it as a key issue. Council performance, both inside the building and at a governance level, is a key thing. We haven't done particularly well lately, although we started off really well. We want that type of diversity that John was talking about, but it's about setting the tone. And it's also about making sure that everybody understands firstly what the role is and what you can and can't do, because once you get inside, you find it's very different. There's a whole lot of stuff that you might want to achieve and what inspires you to stand for council, and you get there and discover that that's not actually that council's business. So making sure you understand what the role is, making sure that all the new councillors are familiar with that and standing orders, and making sure that they have an understanding and hopefully a community mandate that says the expectation is you want better behaviour from your councillors, should help to focus people.
Darren? Anyone else like to ask that question? If elected mayor, how will you lead the council to ensure the city gets the best from what is potentially a diverse range of age, gender, ethnicity, skill and experience around the new council table? Steve.
Rightio. We actually spend about $25 million a year employing people in the Invercargill City Council. We employ 400 staff, and we also employ committee members, and we have a brand new company, which is actually really exciting because it's united with the rest of the district. What we need to do now is we need to redesign council employee roles for true public service so that every identifiable part of the community and individuals can develop. Now, I don't want to say for one moment that we need to remove legislation and control, because that is our mandate, but what we need to do is we need to turn it around so people have a positive vibe coming out from council and working on creating what, as I said before, what I'm calling community education resources. I come from a designer background, and so what I see is, having worked in the University of Otago designing educational resources for students, and I'm a skilled teacher and I work with students in design, what we can do is we can actually present well presented, clear, easy to follow resources and processes for starting up new enterprises, attractions and services. And I do believe that this is a huge priority. It fits under the non-regulatory mandate of our council.
Thank you, Steve. Rebecca and then Tim.
Thanks, John. I talked about it really in my introductory part about the role of the mayor, but I think leadership is about people. And I think the strength that I have, that I would bring to the table as mayor, is the ability to see people for their skills and strengths and help to nurture them and build on their potential so that they contribute the things that they can to the council table and grow as people and make good things happen for the city.
Thank you, Bex. And Tim.
Yes, well, I feel that when you get 12 people and lock them in a room for 3 years and they're under a searchlight and they've got to spend 100 million a year, let me tell you, inevitably there will be friction. There will be different ideas crashing into each other. And to me, that's a vital part of our democratic system. We should have robust debate. We should be prepared to challenge each other. And if it does lead to a bit of argy-bargy, then I'm sorry you're in the wrong business, you know, because it's going to happen, whether you like it or not. And in my way of thinking, that's a healthy sign, and you look back through history and you see that same pattern repeating itself, and that's the reality of the world that we live in.
Thank you, Tim. As Tana Umanga said, it's not tiddlywinks. And I think Tim's just said the same thing. Second question, is there a city that you look at and you think they've got it right in the way that their council operates, and what are some of the successes they've been able to achieve, if you can think of a city?
I'll have a go at that.
Steve?
Something I love to do is go to Wellington and see the people all dressed up, looking stylish, looking around. You know, couples actually hold hands in Wellington when they go out. You know, you go to the theatre and the theatre is full. People are having fun there, you know. The theatre is amazing too. We've put in a lot of work. In Southland we produce amazing theatre, but the stadium, the seats are not full. Now, when you go out in Invercargill to a cafe, there are about 3 that are always full. The rest of them are really, really stoked to see you, and they're wondering if they can figure out a way to get more people coming. Now, what we have is we have a challenge on our hands. And we must build a strong innovation culture where we can learn from cities like Wellington, where actually there's a whole bunch of people who have got a really, really motivation and drive to make things happen, be fit and healthy and beautiful, present themselves, and really get out there and enthusiastically into the community and create cool stuff. And I see that for the future of Invercargill. We're going to make the most exciting and innovative and fun place to hang out. And the truth is that we actually create the most wealth for the country from the south. So let's do that.
Thank you, Steve. Of course, the Mayor of Wellington is Justin Lester, who grew up in Invercargill. Darren.
Yeah, he's a Stewart Island boy who grew up on Tramway Road in the end. I would have to agree with Steve and go, if you had to look at a city in New Zealand at least, it would be Wellington. And I think it was under Mark Blumsky they started to reinvent themselves. They came up with the absolutely positively thing, and Mark wrote a book called Slippers, which was about establishing your city's point of difference and building on that. So for Invercargill, when we went through that process, we figured out it was the family-friendly thing. But Wellington has got a very strong cultural community. They've got tremendous ethnic diversity as well, which I think, where we are now as to opposed to where we were 32 years ago when I arrived is much better, and we could do a lot better in celebrating it. But having more public art, because we're at risk of perhaps becoming an artistic desert at the moment with the closure of some big venues. But they've also got great connectivity, and that's what I like about Wellington. It's easy to walk around. You don't want to take a vehicle into town because you're never going to find a park, and you pay a small mortgage to get there anyway. And why do we feel that getting a park outside the shop you want to go to in Invercargill is so important? If we've got a great public transport system, maybe more people will come into work via buses that are a bit more effective.
Thanks, Darren. Tim or Becs? Tim.
Just briefly, I really look forward to going to Hobart because it's got a convict background that my grandfather was involved with. And at least he got a free trip there from Her Majesty. But what I liked about it was that they had embraced that convict past and turned it into a fabulous tourist attraction. And the van driver who took us around had a really sparkling character. And I think if you get the right number of people in the right environment and a really good tour leader, it's just, I think with the planes coming, that we may have to start looking at that tourism area being boosted a little bit more in Invercargill. Thanks.
For me, I think it's probably Melbourne. 3 reasons for Melbourne. One is they have great community engagement between their council and their communities. The second one is they do a great job of looking after their heritage buildings and mixing heritage with the modern sort of thing. And the third one is they use really good urban planning, and so Melbourne has grown and thrived over the years because of that.
Thank you, Becs. You all mentioned cities that you would fly into and out of, and Tim mentioned the airport. We had a question sent in by email earlier this week, which we were asked to ask if the opportunity arose, and that is, if whoever of you becomes mayor, can you sort out the rental cars at Invercargill Airport when the late flight comes in, please? Because apparently you can't get a rental car in Invercargill.
I'll form a committee to look into it.
I'm sure you will, Tim. Yep. The only question is who's chair of it, Tim. Yeah. Next question. Thinking of this current 2016-19 council term that's coming to an end, what are some of the things that you think council could have possibly done better?
Wow.
You're limited
Should
to a
all
minute.
be leaping to our feet,
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
shouldn't we? Right, you start.
Give me a moment here.
Darren.
Yep. Understood our own processes a bit better. And we've also driven a really strong cultural change at a staff level, and we probably need to get behind that better. But the cultural process is how council at times at a governance level has behaved to change, has behaved to things that when we've unearthed them that we haven't necessarily done them right. And look, if we don't do things right, we want to know about it, and we want to own it, and we want to make sure it doesn't happen again, and we have found a few of those things. But it's about behaviour around that change, owning it, accepting that it's happened, apologising for it genuinely, finding out how to make sure it doesn't happen again, and then moving on.
Darren? Tim was first, Steve.
Yes, I actually think there's a bit of a culture of fear has started to develop in this council of ours, and when you get fear, people won't give their heart and soul into helping you. They get a bit guarded, and we raised it in the last elections. People said there's too much red tape in this council. You've got to make things easier for people. People who want to get permits in this city go mad. They go actually just turned into a nightmare, a quagmire that just shouldn't be happening. a city as small as ours with just 50,000 people, we should be able to resolve those resource consents, and we're sending them to Christchurch and getting help from them. I mean, what is going on in our city? And it's just not working in an area, and we're going to suffer the consequences of this, with resource consents being even more difficult to obtain in the future, and it really makes me sick.
Steve, you were next.
Well, when I first met Tim Shadbolt, it was actually at about 2012, and I came down to see him with a 13-year-old high school student that I was working with. And we brought them some packages of stationery made out of rubbish from the Invercargill City. And we spoke to him about creating a new waste management strategy that would be able to locally make products out of rubbish by micro-manufacturing with waste. And what Tim did is he actually came back to me a few weeks later and he said, "Steve, I'd like to let you know that all those notepads and books that you dropped off that were made out of industrial waste from the school that used to be worksheets and all that kind of thing were then wrapped up and given to all of the councillors for Christmas." And I'd like to see that we can actually create new waste management strategies to screen products that are brought into the city. Then we can organise our waste and reuse before we recycle, and that we can really embrace micro-manufacturing like the people in Bangkok and Thailand and Southeast Asia really know how to do best. It's good.
Thank you, Steve. Becs.
So one of the reasons that I wanted to be on council in the first place was all around the relationship between the council and the community, and so since I've been on council in 2013, I think that started to improve, but I think that council often can be seen to be very reactionary to things instead of being proactive and being one step ahead of the ball. I think also the area of customer experience is an area where we're starting to make improvements, but I think we've still got a good way to go on that.
Thank you, Bex. Thank you, Bex. Final question in this council performance topic. Steve mentioned before that council each year pays $25 million to 400 staff members. Do you see the role of mayor as a part-time or a full-time job? And if part-time, how do you ensure separation and transparency of your role as mayor from other work that you might do? Darren.
Sadly, I see it as a full-time job, and I say sadly because I love the job that I have at the moment at Radio Southland, and it's been a very enriching 10 years there, but if I was successful in getting the mayoralty, I'd have to walk away from it, knowing that the station is in a really good state, but it really is a full-time job now. There's a lot to be done, and you've got to be present to do it. And that means being committed and being here. You know, it's tough because it's not an 8 to 5 Monday to Friday job. It's nights, it's weekends, and you've got to balance that with your life. And for me, it's about making sure that I balance it with my family. So it's a full-time job, otherwise they lose out. So the day job for me is the one that changes.
Darren? What else? Tim?
Yes, well, whether you like it or not, I'm afraid if any of you guys get elected, it will be a full-time job plus. And you can't do everything that's expected of you. You just have to pick out a few areas where you think you can promote the city. And I like the old system we used to have where councils at the beginning of the year get portfolios. You get specific tasks, just 2 or 3, and you focus your energy on those tasks. And that's the only way you can cope with the avalanche of problems and issues. And I decided that SIT was the most important institute in our city. And so I decided I'd help them in every way that I could. And they wanted to diversify their student in terms of the ethnic roles and attractions, and I went to China and lots and lots of countries all around the world, and that has helped with the diversity of the city. It's certainly changed it, I think, for the better.
Thank you, Tim. Becs?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I
then
think
Steve.
it's a full-time job. I already spend most of my time doing council stuff anyway, and because I really love it. And I think that anybody who's got a passion for council would enjoy spending all their time doing it.
Thank you, Bex. Steve?
Yeah, John, coming back to that $25 million, I did a little bit of maths the other day and figured out that
Good, you're a teacher.
Oh, sorry.
That's good, you're a teacher.
Using the average wage, we probably only spend about 21 million of that 25 on the council employees. But there are also a large range of committees. We have the Bluff to consider, and we also have a really, really good Venture Southland replacement, which is now creating relationships with the entire district. And it's a pretty huge challenge, actually. If you're going to be taking on the Mayoral project, you're not only just thinking about Invercargill now when it comes to presenting the city. You're actually thinking about Southland as an entire region and working with the other councils in how we're going to present that to the world. And I don't imagine it's going to be a simple job at all. And actually, full respect to Tim for doing it for so long. Good job, mate.
Thank you, Steve. Like a David Longy Rob my do moment there. Right. Inner city is the next topic. And for this topic, we asked NRG, which is the Inner City Neighbouring Retail Group. We asked them what questions they'd like to pose to the candidates, and here are some of those questions. The first one, it's vital that the CBD rebuild is completed as quickly as possible, otherwise retailers will be affected. What processes would you put in place as Mayor to ensure the development isn't met with any undue or unnecessary delays? Who would like to have a crack at that one first?
Yeah, I'll give it a go.
Steve.
As the block inner city development takes place, our city has an important community development work to do. In the background, while the CBD construction is taking place, council must build a strong innovation culture and learn to empower the public to establish businesses. When we can station our people, giving them the confidence, facilities and pathways to establish businesses, then others will also come into our area and succeed. This is a cultural process for council, and it's a huge challenge. So yeah, that's really it. You know, like in the background, we actually have a huge cultural thing to deal with. South Invercargill and our regions, reaching out to Bluff, for example, there's so much potential that we have, but we need to motivate and give hope to our people and actually figure out how to create the services to get awesome people to be able to do stuff. You know, let's say, for example, that you're sitting at home smoking a bit of weed right now and you're thinking, I've been a butcher for 30 years and that's my destiny to always work for this guy at the butchery. I would love it to be able to challenge that guy and say, listen, sir, you have money in the bank, why not start a butchery and let's distribute meat locally? And he can open up a shop in the city, and I want to see them being able to step into that with confidence.
Thank you, Steve. I was wondering what the connection was to the inner city, but we got there in the finish, so thank you for that. Who would like to go next? Darren.
Thanks, John. Well, we're partway there in appointing the people who, from a council seniority perspective, are going to be dealing with the company driving the redevelopment. But it also needs to happen at a people level. So the construction process, if everybody does what they're supposed to, and it's going to be full of challenges and a public-private partnership, but the public and the retailers in the outlying area need to know where they can go to park, where can the rest of the public go to park, who's open, where have people relocated to, so making sure that there's outstanding communication in that CBD liaison role is going to be really important, and that's because it's not just about building the city block, it's about maintaining what's going on around the city block and keeping the rest of the city as centre of the city vital.
Darren?
Well, I know this is
Tim?
Rebecca's subject, but we're going to have to find houses for those people involved in construction and the retail sector.
Thank you, Tim. And we've got a specific question around housing later on too, so there'll be an opportunity to expand on that. Bex.
Thanks, John. I think that the council is already working pretty hard to make sure we've got good systems in place for the redevelopment. I think it will also involve a lot of communication with the company that's formed to undertake the development and ensure that they have a good understanding of the processes and the things that they're required to do in order to meet the deadlines that they have. I think as much as it's the onus is on the council, the onus also needs to be on them to do the things that they need to do.
Thank you, Bex. Still on the inner city, not so much on the redevelopment, but I guess related to the redevelopment, the CBD nightlife is tired and we need it revitalised. What would you do to ensure this happens?
Form a committee.
Is that your use of your minute? Anyone, Bex?
So one of the things that I think needs to happen while the redevelopment's happening is ensuring that the activity around the CBD doesn't suffer, and I'd like to see the council put in place a discretionary fund for people to make applications to be able to create events and activities in the inner city. So that might be things like a public artwork, or it might be a street concert, and things like that, which could happen in the evening, which is why this is relevant to the question, I guess. And those kinds of things, I think we need to give the onus back to the community so that retailers might be able to tap into that money to do something with it, or people who are interested in the arts might do something with it as well. Street theatre, all of those kinds of things that can encourage people to go into the inner city and enjoy what is there and make sure that the people who are running businesses that are still there don't suffer.
Thanks, Bex. Perhaps a container bar, something like that. Yeah. Darren?
It's partially tough because we're a licensing trust area, and that's not a bad thing in that they are the only organisation that can have taverns, and we're fraught with those places who are cafe bars at the moment, which of course is perfectly legitimate in that a lot of them in that block are being closed, and there aren't actually any places for them to move to, and that's not cheap when you've got to go and set up a commercial kitchen. So looking at options where street food is available, I'm not necessarily going to go as far as a container bar, but we've shown through the Southland Festival of the Arts with an event like White Night that you can do things within the CBD and a whole lot of spaces that do encourage people to get out and about. So more of that sort of vitality would be really cool.
Thank you, Darren. Steve?
I don't like to say it, but I will. I'm actually from Invercargill. I grew up here. I was a teenager here. I was a boy racer. I drove around and around and around and around and around and around the block. I saw the same vitality that we have now 25 years ago. I'm 38 years old, and I feel embarrassed to be able to think that the same people that I've worked with in schools actually face the same kind of community vibe out there in the night time and the nightlife that we did way back then, you know, when I was 17 or 18 years old. And I feel that what we need to do is we really need to try to figure out how to shift it. Somehow it needs to be dynamic, it needs to be really clear, and it needs to be a new introductory culture that we can grab a hold of and be like, dude, come on, let's do this. We need to get the public on board. We need them to believe that somehow Invercargill is shifting into a new era, and that's going to have to be something that's real bold, eh? Boom. I don't actually have the answer for that right now, but I feel that it cannot just be like, oh, yep, sure, we'll build a few more shops. Cool? Yeah, let's do some research and let's find a way.
Tim?
Well, I came here in 1967 and worked on the Manapuri Power Project. And boy, we had a raging life going on in Invercargill. And I think it was 6 o'clock closing. I don't know, well, Mary, you probably knew more about it. I think I crashed in your house a few times. But we just, at 6 o'clock, the pubs emptied and everyone went and had parties. And it was so exciting coming in as a 19-year-old and flush with money and lots of mates from the boxing team and the rugby team. And boy, we caused havoc, you know. And no one ever complained about the lack of nightlife in Invercargill in those days. And the smelter was being built and the population was going up and Mark 1 Zephyrs were right, probably you were in one of them, Steve, but and it was an exciting time.
Yeah, cool, me.
Thank you, Tim. I don't think Steve was in them because he wasn't born till 5 years later, but beside the point. The inner city, the City Council has recently committed several $1 million to the inner city redevelopment. And whilst there will inevitably be some people opposed to that, that seemed to reflect the majority view of the people of Invercargill, that they want to do that. What sort of return are you expecting from that council investment in terms of, is it a financial return or what sort of social return are you expecting from the inner city redevelopment? Darren.
It's not a financial return, it's a return in making sure that the social fabric of the city remains vital. It's not just an Invercargill issue because there's empty shops all over the country. The face of retail is changing everywhere as everybody goes online, so a lot of the future of CBDs actually revolves around hospitality. If we hadn't done it, there would be no space for people to gather. One of the things that we know about Invercargill is that from time to time, the weather can be a little inclement. And so having that indoor space, where even the retailers on either side of the road know that, hey, if our proposition is good enough, people will cross the road to come to us, addressing that issue of parking, because we'll drive round and round for half an hour until we can find a space, but if we know there's a couple of hundred car parks in there, it's going to encourage people into town. If we didn't have that vital city centre, we'd be lost.
Darren? Anyone else want to answer that? Becs?
Yeah, I think it's definitely about a social good kind of aspect more than a financial return. I also think it's about undoing some of the things that have suffered over the years, and that in particular is our heritage buildings and some of our buildings. You know, a lot of people haven't taken care of the buildings as they should, and that has resulted in them becoming in a really poor state, and we need to do something about those, especially with the changes to the earthquake strengthening laws, and this is a good way to get that done.
Becs?
I'm going to go first here.
All right.
Tim?
I think that the retail sector is a difficult one to sort of analyse and see where it's going. A huge building complexes are taking place in Auckland at the moment, and some people argue that this is the way of the future, and others say it's going to be a catastrophe. And the trouble is with projects like that, you don't really know until you try them. And so it's very much, I think, up in the air. When I was Mayor of Waitemata City, we were just at the beginning of that, building those complexes around, and we weren't sure either what the future was. And so we had a lot of walking tracks because we thought people would like to walk everywhere. And we put hoses across, and we thought, oh, maybe a couple of hundred had come in, but no, it was thousands of people were on those walking tracks. And it's very hard to know what the future of recreation and retail and exercise and are going to interplay and interface with each other.
Thank you, Tim. Steve, did you want to respond?
I think with regards to community benefit, something that we don't talk about often, I'm going to link this back to a story. I met a crane driver on the street, and he was telling me that he's been up in a crane looking at the city from above, and he normally drives one of those ramming bulls that knocks buildings down, and he said to me, listen, I'm very concerned about the centre city. Something that we don't talk about is that a lot of the centre city is really high, earthquake prone, and that if we do have a big shake, a lot of it is coming down, and we do not want tragedies. Now, what's happening here, I do believe, is actually quite insightful. You know, what we're doing is we're taking down a lot of those buildings that are really dangerous, and we're replacing them with buildings that are going to be structurally strong, and I do hope that we don't import cheap metal from China like Christchurch has, to reframe those up. Now, what's going to happen, I do believe, at some point in New Zealand, and this comes back to our environment strategies, is that New Zealand is going to have a big shake-up. We may find that there is a port that gets taken out, and then we may find that there are cities where there are a lot of people cannot live. Now, Invercargill needs to be ready for a migration that we haven't even planned for yet, and that we need to be able to have buildings that stay up.
Thank you, Steve. Our next topic is about buildings that stay up, and that's housing. The Southland Housing Action Forum has identified our current housing crisis requires in Southland around about 2,200 more houses than what we've got, and then about 500 new houses every year for each of the next 5 years. And a recent survey showed that 64% of Southland businesses are having problems attracting or retaining staff purely due to a lack of housing for staff to live in. So the question for each of you around housing, how involved do you think council should be in finding solutions to this housing crisis? And what housing initiatives would you like to see council lead? Who wants to go first? Bex, I thought you might.
So I've been involved with the Southland Housing Action Forum and the other housing group, the community housing one, and there certainly is a big issue for housing across the spectrum. So I think there's several things that need to be done. The feedback that I've been getting from developers is that we need to do some changes to our district plan so that there's more land available in North Invercargill for them to build houses on. So I think that's something that we definitely have to spearhead. We also need to do something about South Invercargill, because that's where there actually is a lot of land available for infill, but it's not as profitable there for people to build houses in South Invercargill. And one of the barriers to that is the upfront cost of connecting services. And so I think that we need to work out some kind of loan system whereby developers could borrow the money or council could pay for the services to go in and then pay that money back once they sell the properties or rent them out and those kind of things. I also think we need to work with the government to get more state houses built here as quickly as possible, and elderly housing as well.
Thank you, Bex. Darren?
There is absolutely a housing shortage. Council has a role to play, but it's not about investing council's money in people's individual equity in houses or in investors. It is about making it easier for investors to proceed with good developments. Absolutely. But there are other options that will be looked at as well. Steve will talk about in a moment, and I don't disagree with them. Tiny houses. There's a lot of people living in caravans, which is not great down in this part of the world because they're blimmin' cold in the middle of winter. But tiny houses offer a really good option for those who can cope with them. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but if you can cope with them, why not? And you can get a good number of them covering across a piece of property. But the other option that hasn't necessarily been fleshed out either is apartment living. We've got reserves everywhere. The CBD development, if there's space in there for residential housing to be included, why not? But perhaps more apartments will help provide some of that accommodation shortage.
Thank you, Darren.
Rightio. Okay, well, the first thing we need to do is coming back to community education. We need to demystify the Building Act 2004, and we need to address ways to be able to reveal what is really important in the Resource Management Act 2004, two very important documents that there are so many hundreds of clauses in that if you do not know exactly what to do, you're going to find yourself pulling your hair out trying to figure out how to build anything new. The second thing is that I believe that the council can create pathways for 6,000 new small buildings to be built in Southland to be owned by Southlanders. Now at the moment it costs about between $2,500 and $3,500 per square metre to build. Okay, you can build a small building, 10 square metre small building that does not need a permit, that is fully legal, and that is built under Section 1 of the Building Act for around $5,000 if you can get things built at cost and build it yourself. Now I'm not saying that every single person can build things themselves, but there are ways that we can implement SIT courses in our university down here or a college down here where people can learn to build and they can become trained up enough to be able to go out there and supply services at a low cost to the community. We need to be able to figure out how to get houses so that people do not have to borrow money or a lot of money to get there. Or I think that we need to be able to overpopulate our city with buildings so that we can be ready for a big growth.
Thank you, Steve. Tim.
Well, I just can't for the life of me work out what's gone wrong with housing in this country of ours. My dad was a pilot in the Fleet Air Arm, and when we got back from Suez, they had a transit camp in West Auckland, just hundreds of little batches, bit like your homes that they put us into until they could build state houses. And it was actually possible to get a house for $500 deposit in West Auckland. You could cash in the child allowance on the kids, and that gave you another $2,500. And so I went back and had a look at that house, which cost us $25,000. It's still there, completely untouched, but it's now up for sale for $1 million. And you think, how is that possible? Nothing had changed. It was my garage that I built, my driveway that I built. Nothing had changed on that house. And what's gone wrong? And I can't figure it out, so it's up to you, Steve.
So you two start again. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for your answers to that question on housing. We're going to move to our fifth topic, and that's city assets. And this is about existing city assets. So we've talked about the inner city development, and very soon we're going to see emerging from the ground a shiny new inner city, which is great. The question, I guess, the other side of that, what about some of the existing city assets that need attention? Assets such as Southland Museum and Art Gallery, the Water Tower, Anderson's Park, and then funding questions around Stadium Southland, Rugby Southland, Rugby Park. What's council's role in enlivening those significant existing city assets? Darren?
Council's role is key in most of them, but not all. So for the museum, which I'll touch on because it's pretty close to it, the museum is currently an independent trust board, but there's been a study done on what options were available after the closure, and details on that will be released in the next few weeks, so I won't touch on that. The ACI has been postponed until we can get a culture and heritage strategy, and that makes good sense as well because we're at risk of becoming that artistic desert that I talked about a little earlier on. Anderson House, that's not so easy because it's a shame to see that beautiful gift to the city sitting there with no activity inside it. Everybody gets very passionate about the water tower, and you know, it's beautiful, but I don't necessarily feel the need to be able to climb it just to make sure that it's not going to fall on me when I drive up Queen's Drive would be really useful. So council's role in making sure that those city-owned assets is key. The current council's set priorities, and we need to make sure that the new council is in line with them.
Thank you, Darren. Who would like to go next?
I'll give it a crack.
Steve.
So I guess this discussion is centred around the establishment and maintenance of services and facilities, including local activities venues. What we're doing really is we are looking at public services that Invercargill City manages. And the first thing I want to identify is that the only company that the Invercargill City Council holds that makes any money is called Invercargill City Holdings Limited, which pulls in about $5.8 million per annum. But we also have Southland Museum costs, art gallery costs, sports and recreation services, and a lot of other costs that are bringing in $0 income. Now, we do need to stop playing copycat from other cities. If it's not working, then we need to look at designing and developing new ways to make use of our public facilities and potentially figure out who in the council is, who in the public is paying for these services, and how can we make sure it benefits them as well as attracts the people that we want so that we can end up with the vibe we're looking for.
Thank you, Steve. Becs.
So I think the thing with most of those projects is that they're all in a process at the moment, and unfortunately sometimes those processes take a long time. I think where we fall down at a governance level is that we don't communicate that process very well to the community, and we certainly don't communicate on a regular basis So one of the things I'd like to see the council do, for example, is have an arts, culture and heritage action plan with regular reporting back to the community so that people actually know what's going on, because people keep saying to me, what's happening with the museum, for example, and that's because there's no regular information about what's happening with the museum going out to the community.
Thank you, Becs. Tim?
Well, I still think that we can do a lot more than we're doing with these issues. Like the pyramid, it's a beautiful shape and can be seen from all points around the city, but it needs to be used. We can't just have it rotting around us and mould growing over it. Surely we can clean it up and paint it and put movies on or sort of light shows. I went to a couple of them 20 odd years ago now, but I think we can use those facilities we've got in a more creative way that just brings a bit of life and lightness and joy to the city.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. We're moving now to our final topic, which is the 4 well-beings, which are being reintroduced into the Local Government Act, whereby local authorities are, as well as providing core services, going to have to take account of the 4 well-beings, which are social, economic, cultural and environmental. And the question for you from that is, how much influence do you think those 4 well-beings should have over council decision making? And with you as Mayor, how would council ensure that those well-beings are taken into account and reflected in council decisions? Becs.
I don't think you can say definitively on all situations it's one way or the other. I think it depends on what the decision is about how much influence each of the 4 well-beings would have on it. And I think you've got to remember that council has 2 responsibilities or 2 purposes under the Local Government Act, and one of them is about making sure that things like infrastructure and that kind of stuff is all efficient and effective for present and future generations. So that's definitely part of what needs to be taken into account when we're looking at those things. But certainly the well-beings of the community is also an important part to take into account when you're looking at making decisions.
Thank you, Becs. Darren?
A lot of people get excited about the well-beings being reintroduced. Well, they didn't actually go away from the core of what it is that we want to do anyway. We could have just been pinged by somebody if they wanted to object to what we were doing because we were looking after some social good in our community, because that's essentially the expectation that you have of us. So I guess the difference is in how we engage with the public to find out about what it is that you're looking for when it comes to each of those 4 different things. And when then we as council and with the right leadership, you've got to try and figure out which of those priorities comes first and what you can afford.
Thank you, Darren. Steve or Tim?
No, I haven't thought of anything.
Steve?
I'm going to put aside all of the government expectations right now and just face the facts that what we have is we have a problem on our hands. The Labor government's currently trying to figure out how we're going to deal with all this stuff called mental illness and how we're going to medicate people and decide what counselling they need and all these kinds of issues. Now let's just turn it around right now and figure out what is best for the people, what's going to make people inspired and feel like they're living meaningful lives, how are we going to do what really matters. And then I want to figure out how to reverse engineer that. I actually want to see every single person in Invercargill rising up in hope and wanting to have a go at building the life that they really want, and then try to figure out how to reverse engineer that so that it aligns with what the council has to do. That's my mission.
Thank you, Steve. Tim, anything you want to add?
Well, that's my mission too.
I thought Darren's claim that we all got excited when they introduced the 4 well-beings was a bit extravagant, and I think Tim's the exception. He didn't get that excited, obviously, when they introduced the 4 well-beings. That's our 6 topics exhausted. We do have a little bit of time for questions from the floor. And I see someone's got their hand up, and I'll say at the start, we're only going to be able to take one or two probably. And so, in inviting questions from the floor, just make sure that you stand up and speak clearly what your question is, and make sure it's a question rather than a statement or a sermon on the Mount. So, with that little proviso, gentleman with his hand up beside the camera.
Wonderful, absolutely. Any four of you would be terrific, absolutely terrific as mayor. Problem that we have is Tim's the clear favourite. We're going to split the vote. Now I'm going to ask the challengers, are you prepared to withdraw if one of you appears as the clear favourite, so that we have a 2-horse race rather than a 4-horse race?
Quite a challenging question. Who would like to respond to that first? Tim, I don't think you get the opportunity to comment on this.
No, I think it's quite good the way it is.
Would either of you other 3 horses like to respond?
No.
Yeah.
Understand what you're saying, but it's too late. The process is locked in. You've got 4 candidates. That's how the voting papers which are being printed now are going out, and it's really up to people to make a decision. Nobody, I think, denies the fact that when you're contesting the mayoralty against Sir Tim, who is a New Zealand icon, that is an easy challenge. He's been a popular mayor. He's been the longest serving mayor in New Zealand, period. His current tenure started in 1998. That's a big ask. But the question to you is, are you happy with that in today's setting, or do you want change? Am I going to back out? Nope.
Thank you, Darren. Becs, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, totally what Darren said in terms of the voting papers are already being printed. I think the most important thing that any voter should be asking themselves is, given what Invercargill has ahead of it in the next however many years, what is the kind of person that we need leading the city in that time, and what kind of skills and attributes does that person need to have? And then you need to decide which of the 4 of us has those attributes and skills. And I guess my challenge to you is to not just think about who says they have the skills, but who actually has shown that they have those skills and attributes.
Thank you, Becs. Steve.
Yes, a similar question was proposed by the Southland Times yesterday when I met with them, and they asked me, how do you think you're going to beat Tim Shadbolt? And my response to that, I just feel to repeat now, is that all we can do is put our best foot forward, decide what our values are, figure out what our gifts and talents are, and present ourselves the best we can in the situations that we find ourselves being convicted to go for. And then it's up to the public to decide. And it's that simple.
One here. There's a gentleman here with his hand raised.
Yes, from each of the candidates, one of the things I've picked up in the media has been some discussion about the mayoral car and the price of that car. I would like to find out, when the mayoral car comes up for replacement, what each of you intend to do. Do you intend to replace with an American $72,000 model or one of the specified clear hand leads?
I'll give it a go.
You just love an enthusiast. Steve, and then Darren had his hand up.
I personally prefer Japanese sports cars. And I do believe that we're going to find an overwhelming increase in electric vehicles over the coming era. Something we do need to figure out, though, is ethics behind those. Who is building batteries? Yeah, that's the big question. And so we need to try and think about the global effect of what the stuff we're buying as well. I think that actually that's something that Invercargill can do, that we can model to the rest of the world how to do green, and that could be a part that we play in the planet, to saving the planet. And I think we need to take that on right now.
Thank you, Steve. Darren.
Thanks, good question. 2 things control the answer. One was a review done by the Higher Salaries Commission, which has actually set a ceiling on the maximum amount that can be spent on a mayoral car anywhere in New Zealand now, and unfortunately the Chrysler falls well above it. And secondly, Council has also just recently entered into an all-of-government purchasing scheme which prescribes the brands that we were able to acquire at a much more affordable rate. They are more modest and in direct answer to your question, probably a hybrid.
Darren?
So I've already made a post about this on my Facebook page actually. So I already have a hybrid. I bought it about 4 years ago. Interestingly, since I've had it sign written, lots of people seem to think I've got a new car all of a sudden, but I don't. And I'm quite happy with the hybrid. It was one of the best decisions I ever made in terms of cost to run and petrol costs. And so I don't actually need another car, so I'd be happy just to stick with my own car and continue to pay for it myself and run it myself. And I'd really like to use the mayoral car allowance to go towards a community project, preferably one with a sustainable outcome.
Tim, do you want to comment on the car issue?
Yes. I heard Dick's wanting to sell the car and put the money into a community project, and Tom Conroy had exactly the same thing in the last elections. He said, I'm going to sell the mayoral car and give that money to charity. And I felt a bit bad about it, but I had to say, listen mate, it's not your car, okay? You don't have any control. Your council will decide what happens to that car, not you. And people need to be reminded sometimes that the council property belongs to all the people of Invercargill, and those options can only be decided by the council.
We've got limited time left, and we're going to be able to take 2 more questions. We've got Nobby Clark, I think, there, and then Ross Lindsay up the back, and then we're going to have to bring it to a close.
I'm female.
It's not a gender decision.
My question relates to 2 issues that have been very painful for ratepayers in the last 3 years. And I guess I'd like candidates to give us some idea, and then we'll have some closure on both those issues. First one is the waste net issue. Overwhelming number of ratepayers want that, that's the way it is, don't want it to go to 13. And the second issue is the reopening of the museum. And people want the right contact with, want to have the museum re-strengthened and open where it is. So I'd like to hear what the candidates have got to say.
I guess with regards to the museum, sorry, does someone else want to go?
No, you go.
I understand that it's actually 2 separate structures, that you have an internal structure and then you have an external structure which holds up the roof. The roof's made out of polypanels and it's apparently a fire risk. Now what we need to do is we need to actually do more consultation on this. I do believe that it would be good to get two or more separate opinions on what needs to be done with the building. The internal building may be able to be strengthened and the external building may be able to be fire jibbed from the inside. And I do believe because it's made out of polypanels which are the wrong way, the reason why they leak is because there's not enough overlap on the flashings. So I think we can wrap the whole thing, slam a really good tin roof over the top, flash it really beautifully, and it can be waterproof once again. What's the second question?
Southland Disability Enterprises.
Ooh.
Your view around the WasteNet contract.
Yes, I cannot claim to be able to solve that, but I think that there is a related issue, and that is that we're not really using the rubbish the best we can, and that the Southland Disability Enterprises people are amazing. I've been down there, I've taken students through with tours, it's incredible, but we need to actually stand back and think, either of those companies at the moment set up to be able to make best use of our rubbish, and to be able to make it so that we don't end up with mountains and mountains of the stuff that doesn't get processed, and with no one that's prepared to buy it. So we're going to have to stop and just think, over and over again, what is it that we really need to do with this rubbish, and then try and build systems for it.
Thank you, Steve. Who would like to respond next? Darren, on the 2 topics.
Yep. SDE, yeah, we're really keen to see the whole thing resolved as soon as possible either, and see a good outcome for everybody. Museum, my preference is to see it redeveloped on the site. Unfortunately, you've got 3 buildings underneath the pyramid that will work against each other in an earthquake, so just a general strengthen up is not going to be enough. There's a complete redevelopment that needs to happen, but then the community, we don't know. There could be a discussion where they say they want to see it in town. My preference is to see it out at the park, and unfortunately, as a trustee who's liable for people that's in the building, putting up a sign at the door saying that it's earthquake prone doesn't remove the risk.
Thank you, Darren. Becs or Tim, would you like to comment?
Well,
Tim?
I've made my views quite clear on the disabled workers who are being punished, and I just can't understand how people who are meant to be listening to public opinion, to deprive those people of their work is just the most dastardly thing we can do, and does not represent, I believe, the real values of Southland. And I can't work out why they would want to. You can look at the mob they're trying to link us up to on YouTube. Why would we want to go into a partnership with such dodgy people?
Thank you, Tim. Becs.
Yeah, so we're in a process with both of those things. I think with regard to the museum, you know, it's closed. It's been closed for over a year now. I think we need to see this as an opportunity to get a redevelopment of the museum, which is what's underway and is going to happen. And it's already been mentioned, I think, around the interim museum presence that we're going to have in the inner city, and that's going to be a great opportunity for us to test and trial different things that might be in the museum in future, which is great. And I think with regard to SDE, and I think it's already been said as well, but nobody wants to see the people who work for SDE left without work, and so we're all working towards a solution that will mean that those people still have meaningful employment.
Thank you, Becs. I said before we'd only take one more question from Ross Wensley. We'll take a question from Ross Wensley, and then we'll take a question from down the front here after that. Ross.
In relation to the earthquake strengthening of our buildings, if you notice around the town, there's probably nearly half our buildings are in a bad state in respect of earthquake requirements. In fact, the new development is fantastic because one of the most dangerous buildings in town will be coming down, and you all know where that is. You walk into the 7-Day Dairy. So my question is to each candidate, what are you going to do specifically to make it possible that the landlords that own all those buildings can actually do them up or strengthen them or demolish them? What are you going to do? Because they're all there dangerous. There's a whole lot that are 10 times more dangerous than the museum you've closed or Anderson Park.
Okay, Ross, who would like to go first?
So the council's just developed a heritage building strategy which kind of comes out of the district plan. The district plan identifies over 160 heritage buildings in the inner city, and it was realised that we can't help 160 buildings because it's just too many in a short time. So we've identified a priority list of buildings, and those will be the ones that the council is working actively with the owners to try and help them. We've already had a couple of workshops with Heritage Equip, who offer funding through the government to help with getting reports done on buildings and getting work done on them and those kind of things. And we've got someone who's in the process of being appointed, I'm not sure her official title, but as a heritage advisor for the council to help building owners work through that stuff.
Thank you, Becs. Next, Darren.
So the district plan, as Beck said, is in place, and it's not really up to council to invest too much in people's personal equity, because we need to recognise that a lot of those landlords didn't bother to maintain their buildings and let them get into that state. But if you have a look at what Dunedin City's done in the warehouse precinct, they've shown some tremendous leadership. So working through that list of heritage buildings that we've already identified and employing something similar to what they've done in Dunedin is the best way forward.
Thank you, Darren.
Well, when you raise issues like that, Ross, you realise how much or how little power that a mayor really has in this community. And so the issue I've been wrestling with is the rubber bands. it was a headline in the paper that I've spent $3,000 on wristbands, and I just thought I should explain it to you. The
I should have said if you could try and match the answer with the question, that would be quite good too.
Well, I'll try and race through it. So I thought there's kids who look after the traffic control, the Orange Brigade. They look after the pedestrian crossings that are attached to our schools. And I thought to recognise the work they do, I'd give them all an ice cream. But then they decided ice creams were unhealthy, so I thought I'll get them a little rubber band they can put round their wrist. And now I've got a letter from some greenie outfit who says that I've got to withdraw these wristbands because they're a danger to health. And I just want you to know that that's an important issue that a mayor, whoever wins, was going to have to deal with.
Thank you, Tim. Steve, would you like to respond to the earthquake question?
Yes. Something else that we need to consider that is directly a council responsibility is that there are about 1,000 kilometres worth of pipes underground around the city that at some point need to be replaced. They are as aged as those buildings are, if not older, and it's going to potentially cost a couple of $100 million to replace it all under the current methods. Now, buildings that are owned by ratepayers are privately owned, and it may be the possibility that may be actually the unfortunate position where these people need to think about whether they're going to be able to bring another investor in to help to be able to manage these buildings. They're valuable, but they're going to be very, very expensive to fix under the current building acts and the council laws. So what we need to do is we need to try to figure out the best we can how to make sure that it's possible to fix them, and then encourage these people to either get them ready to sell or to bring somebody else on board, and then equip them the best we can to make sure that they're fixed.
Thank you, Steve. Yep. Final question down the front here.
Hi, kia ora everyone. My name is Anili. I'm not from here, as you can hear. I've been living here for more than 2 years. And what I enjoy living here, I would like to ask you, what about facing the challenge, coming challenge about our environment, the climate change? I'm a bit sad to haven't heard really about environmental policy here. We talked briefly about the poor well-being, and I would like to see what's your plan for this big city? What about having transport, energy-efficient building, city levels, about common space areas, trees? What is your plans about environmental something community centres?
Thank you. Mary, who would like to go first responding to that environmental well-being? Just talking about the 4 well-beings, one of them is environmental, and Mary has asked what is each mayoral candidate going to do from an environmental perspective? What's their plan to focus on lifting the environmental game in the city? Who would like to start? Becs?
I can start that one. So as a council, we don't really have much of a strategic plan around climate change at all, and I think that that's something that we've definitely been lacking, and we really need to focus on. So that would be one of the first things that I would try to initiate if I became the mayor, is something in that space. I think that we need to look at how we can transition our vehicle fleet, for example, to electric cars and hybrids and those kinds of things. I think we already have good playgrounds and parks and recreation areas. We've looked before at how to use organic sprays with mixed success and failure. We got a lot of complaints about weeds growing everywhere, so I think we do need to look at how we can make better use of those kinds of products, but we need to figure out how to use them first so that we don't end up with a messy looking town.
Thank you, Becs. Darren?
So with climate change specifically, our primary area is in around the district plan. When we came up with the current version, took some of what was presented in climate change and worked it in, but obviously there's been a lot more information that's come in since the 6 years that we started work on the district plan now, and we're able to review the district plan piece by piece rather than the whole thing, really useful. So looking at what we can do around the likes of sea level rise, which isn't as big an issue for us as it is in some other areas like Dunedin. When you're looking at green buildings, for example, what incentives can council put in place to help encourage it? The first thing we should go back to doing is reintroducing the building awards that we used to do that recognised not only those people who'd done some work on their buildings to encourage or restore the heritage values, but also recognising those developers who were courageous enough to put up green buildings too.
Thank you, Darren. Tim or Steve?
Well, I know I'll sound like a heretic in this situation, but when we were working on the Manapuri Power Project, you had to drill holes with a pneumatic drill and then stick dynamite in and then blow out the dynamite, and a man a mile got killed, and that was considered acceptable so long as we kept it down to that rate. So there were 17 miles of tunnel and 17 men got killed. And then I went out to have a look at the site as a tourist, and although it was like a World War I scene when we were actually digging that tunnel, the moss had grown and beautiful trees, and it actually looked wonderful, and the bus had to stop every 100 yards so that the Japanese on board could take photos. And I think Mother Nature is a lot more resilient than we give her credit for.
Thank you, Tim. Steve, would you like to make a final response to that question?
It's a very uncomfortable topic, isn't it? I do believe that what we need to do is recognise, for example, that we actually export about 49% of New Zealand's export meat. We produce about 800 millilitres of milk per annum. We create vegetables. We grow amazing things like garlic. We need to figure out how to convince our local farmers and businesses to diversify their crops and to distribute food locally. We need to figure out how to get water into our city that can be stored, and to be able to educate our people and how to actually function as a micro society rather than getting all of our food from overseas, or, for example, growing carrots just down the road there and then driving the water to Christchurch and back a week later so they can end up in the supermarket and then be sold at full price. Now, I do believe that what we can do is we can actually create another model. We'll redesign the food industry, we redesign the way we do travel, and we even look at whether we need all the roads that we've got in this city already. Cool?
Thank you, Steve, and thank you to all of you for your questions. We do need to bring that to a close now because we're moving now to the final section of tonight's discussion, which is a further set of three ones they made earlier, so pre-prepared statements from the candidates. The first one of those, and I mentioned earlier that we will have a different speaking order in order to be fair to all four candidates. So the first speaker for this topic will be Steve, and the topic is, in 2 minutes or less, name your top 3 priorities should you become mayor. Steve.
I've got a problem because I only have 4. 1, community education, governance and engagement. Each council service is to be involved in the community education, moving beyond regulation and control to resourcing the public. 2, housing and infrastructure, housing and planning. Develop ways to solve our housing crisis using small buildings which anyone from any walk of life can own and live in. 3, waste management. Waste management strategies to reuse waste locally, building relationships and community for micro-manufacturing using waste. 4, events and attractions. Invercargill will become the most fun and exciting place in New Zealand to go out with a dynamic vibe that is established by locals, so we need to empower the locals to be able to want to do that.
Thank you very much, Steve. Darren, you're next.
Priority 1, take stock. We've talked about the great big projects that the City Council's got on its list currently, so let's pause, take stock and ensure that we make our way through that properly and in a considered way before we look at anything else. My second priority is making sure that we continue to promote Invercargill as a family-friendly brand. It's not just about supporting families, but it's also making sure that we're business-friendly as a council, because it's no good promoting a family-friendly city if there aren't jobs, if there aren't opportunities for startups, if there aren't opportunities for existing businesses to expand. I'd also like to see us develop the relationship better with the Chamber of Commerce. But also my proposal is to go out and meet with businesses personally, see what their issues are, talk to them directly. A family-friendly city is one where people want to come and live, which for businesses means that they're going to be able to attract staff and retain them, and that's what we're going to need to do if we want to hit that target of 10,000 extra people. My third priority is around council performance. We've touched on that heavily already tonight, so I won't labour it too much, but we need to let the staff know that they are valued, that we do recognise how difficult their jobs are, and when someone complains that we don't instantly leap in on the attack, but we make sure that we actually have a full understanding of what the issues are. Sometimes council is quite often used as a blame hound. But if we haven't done something the way that we should have, then we need to own that, we need to apologise, and we need to change it to make sure it doesn't happen again. So take stock, family friendly, and performance.
Thank you, Darren. Tim, you're up next. Your top 3 priorities should you become mayor.
Top 3, well, it'd have to be the smelter first of all, because of the number of jobs it creates in the city, and because what they're facing at the moment is costs of transmitting that electricity to the North Island. So they're providing a real base for our wealth and prosperity and well-being. And we'd be a sad little town if we didn't have them, and we should fight to defend the situation they're in at present is outrageous. SIT is the second one. I've been on about that all night, but it's just, it makes us look so good as a city that we were able to step into education reform. They never expected it. They saw Invercargill as a sort of rural backwater. We had the fastest declining population in New Zealand or Australia, and we managed to pull our way out of it. And the third one is, I like things, and there's lots of the variations to it, is Kids Zone, because to me the most fabulous thing about Invercargill is the facilities we've got for our children, and they can actually have access to them. In West Auckland we've got those facilities too, but you can't get near them because of traffic jams all over the place. And we can raise families in a far more creative and environmental areas that are like tramping and other things. So a great place to raise a family.
Thank you, Tim. Becs, your top 3 priorities.
So we've already talked about all 3 of my top priorities. The first is the relationship between council and the community. The second one is about governance, council governance, and the third one is about housing. So with regard to the council's relationship with the community, I mentioned earlier that there are 2 purposes to local government in the Local Government Act, and the one that everybody knows and talks about is all about infrastructure and effective and efficiency for the present and future generations. But the first purpose of local government, and it is listed first in the Act, is to enable local and democratic decision making and action by and on behalf of communities. So I think we've got a pretty strong mandate to make sure that we engage with our communities way better than we do. We've already talked lots about governance, and it's been a hot topic tonight. I think some of the things that we can do to make sure that governance is more efficient in future is things like providing the opportunity at council meetings for councillors to report back on the activities that they've been doing in the 6 weeks between full council meetings. At the moment, people don't know what councillors do in their time except for going to council meetings, and I think that that's one really easy thing we can do to get on the road for that. Housing, already talked about all of the issues there with housing. I've been part of driving our council's position on housing, and earlier this year we made some resolutions about that, and one of those was to do more to enable affordable housing. And I think as a council we really need to push that agenda because housing is a huge issue. We need over 2,000 new houses as it is already, plus 500 a year for the next 5 years, and we really need to get our A into G and get those houses built.
Thank you, Becs. So that's your priorities. What I would like from each of you now, beginning with Darren, is one sentence that describes your number 1 leadership quality. What leadership quality, one quality, do you offer the people of Invercargill?
Okay, I believe I have a genuinely open mind, and whilst I might have an opinion on issues, if someone can show me a better or different way that I hadn't considered, I'm quite comfortable with changing my position.
Thank you, Darren. Tim, you're up next. One sentence of your number one quality.
I'm a fighter.
Becs, don't tell us you're a lover. One sentence, please.
I could, but I'm not going to. So for me, leadership is about people, and my number one leadership quality is that I'm able to treat people as individuals. I understand that everyone is different, and I build on people's strengths so they can find their potential and become contributing members of the team.
Thank you, Becs. Steve, you will have worked out your next. One sentence on your number one leadership quality.
I'm an activator who gets things started, naturally seeing how to turn ideas into action, and as a result, make things happen.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate all of you sticking to the one sentence. That was excellent. Thank you for that. We've got our final speaking slot now for each of the four, beginning with you, Mayor Tim. 1 minute. Why should people vote for you as Mayor of Invercargill?
Well, I still reckon experience counts. Now, I know I've been criticised by some of my councillors as being an old git and over the hill and should retire and all the rest of it, but I still think what I bring to the table after 31 years of being a mayor of two cities isn't something that you can just achieve overnight. And there are so many facets to local government. There's so many issues that you have to face. There's so many people you have to communicate with that it requires, I think, a lot more skills than a lot of people realise. And I know I made a joke about towing the concrete mixer behind the mayoral car and got elected as a result of that one and only policy. And yet, so you can rise up and learn a job like this, but it takes, again, a unique set of circumstances to find yourself in that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Becs.
I have the right skills, and I not only say that, but have a proven record. I have demonstrated leadership in the community through many community initiatives. I was appointed Deputy Mayor because I demonstrated leadership within the council at a time when it was lacking. I'm dedicated to the city. People often tell me I'm the most hard-working councillor. I have experience in council, yet I bring a new attitude and a new way of doing things. When I look at council, I see opportunities to do so many things differently instead of boundaries that mean we keep doing things the same way. I represent the ordinary person. I come from a working class background, was a mum at 18, and have had to learn a lot and work hard to get where I am today. I'm a business owner. I understand the need for a strong business sector, as well as a great community to attract and retain people. Most importantly, I love being on council and I love serving my community, and I am not the status quo.
Thank you, Becs. Steve, why should people vote for you as Mayor of Invercargill?
Firstly, I must say that we must invest time in understanding the work that has already been done to establish our city and the wider region. You guys have done an amazing job who came before me. Much pioneering work has taken place, and full respect goes out to those who have contributed. From here, we must understand what is truly important for the coming era, then do what is best for the people. Our priority is to identify issues, understand people, research, develop ideas, then reach fresh outcomes while becoming more attractive. I can offer activation, I can make action plans and make things happen. I'm upbeat and share contagious enthusiasm to get people excited about what really matters. I'm focused and fully able to take direction and follow through and stay on track. Let's make this city amazing.
Thank you, Steve. And our fourth candidate, Darren Ludlow, why should people vote for you as Mayor of Invercargill?
Many people have told me that the time has come for change and that they and I believe that I'm the right person to lead that change. It's not about disrespecting what we've had, it's about recognising that we're actually in a new space now and our leadership needs to reflect that. And change can be scary for some people. I've had to constantly embrace it throughout my working life, particularly with technology. I'm open and progressive but experienced and positively networked at a local, a provincial and a national level. And I think that means I can help to ensure that our voice isn't lost and Invercargill can remain best positioned to be the best city to lead the South into the future. I've talked about being family focused and my family are fully behind me as I take this step. They know the changes that it'll bring. They know that there are some negatives that come with that, but they believe in me and I love them for that. We're a tight family, immersed in this community and all actively involved, each in a variety of ways, and I'm proud to have their support as I look to take community representation to this next level.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you to all of our candidates for your contribution to the discussion tonight. And that, ladies and gentlemen, basically is that. You've had opportunity tonight to see and listen and now decide for yourself who is the bright one, who it is that you now wish to vote for as Mayor of Invercargill City. This week we've seen the hoardings begin to go up around the city. Postal voting papers will be distributed between the 20th and the 25th of September. And to be counted, your voting paper must be completed and returned to reach the council before voting closes at 12 noon on Saturday the 12th of October. Also being elected that day will be councillors to Environment Southland, and for Invercargill City, of particular relevance is the Invercargill-Rakura constituency, where there are 6 seats. There will be a Meet the Candidate night for that election on Monday the 16th of September, so Monday week, 5:30 p.m. at the Invercargill Working Men's Club. There are 13 candidates for that. Unlucky for some, I suspect it might be unlucky for the fabulous Sarah McCarthy, who's emceeing that event, trying to herd 13 candidates into a sensible, coherent night. But that's 16th of September, 5:30 p.m. Good luck again to all of our candidates, and good luck to Invercargill in choosing the next Mayor of our city. Thank you all for attending, and have a safe trip home. Thank you.